Hello again, everyone. This is Chris Schura, and this is the Citizen Sports Weekly for Friday, December 9th, 2022. Robert Harding and Justin Ritzel are with me. We're going to pick 4 NFL games, then we'll give our takeaways from last weekend in the NFL. Although realistically, I want to talk about last night's game. That was a fun one. Real fun, but we'll get to that later. So our first game, Robert's Buffalo Bills, a very hefty double-digit 10-point home favorite versus the Jets, who, as we all know, beat the Bills earlier this season. Robert, it's your Bills. I'll let you do the first pick. Do your Bills cover, or are the Jets going to make it a little closer than you might like?
Well, unlike my colleague who finds every reason to bet against his team usually, I will be taking the Bills at home in this one. I think it's a recipe for a nice division win at home. Coming off that Patriots win, they've had a little break here, which they've needed, quite frankly, after some of the injury woes that they've had and a fairly early bye on the schedule. So, nice little extended break due to the last Thursday game that they played there. So. I like where the Bills are trending. They've put together some wins here. Look, the NFL this time of year, it's not always going to be pretty. So I'll take what I can get. I think that they've been able to, still move the ball pretty well offensively. The defense, I think, there's some work that has to be done there, but as they get healthier, I think that's better. Obviously the loss of Von Miller is a blow. But I think that defense can match up pretty well against the Jets offense, which, Mike White, I think, is an upgrade over Cougar Hunter there. But at the same time, it's not like they have a plethora of weapons, where they're going to rack up like 30, 40 points a game. So, I think the Bills can do pretty well against them, and, it'll be a home field advantage for them. They need this division win. So I like them to cover. That might surprise some people. Hopefully not. If you've watched this video, I've been riding the Bills all year because, again, the guy below me on the screen when it comes to picking his team.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Justin. I'm sad that Robert's talking about you like that, but go ahead and give us your thoughts on this pick.
I wasn't sure which colleague Robert was talking about. I mean, Chris, you picked the Dolphins last week, and we kind of laughed at you and said how ridiculous that was, and we turned out to be right. But I have both picked for my team and picked against them this year, so I know Robert can't be talking about me. Anyway,
we know who we're talking
about. I think the Jets probably deserved a better fate last week against the Vikings. I thought they played a pretty good game, and they had a couple drives, right in the last few minutes there that got deep in Minnesota territory, and they just couldn't punch it in. So the Jets they have a very good defense, and I think finally a competent quarterback. I'm not saying Mike White is gonna light the world on fire, but they can move the ball with him. They have some really good receivers. Obviously, Garrett Wilson has come on as a rookie. Corey Davis is a very solid veteran. He's kind of forgotten about, but, he was a former, I think, number 4 overall pick. So they just needed a quarterback to steer the ship. The Bills, they got to be feeling great. Obviously, they didn't play on Sunday. They played Thursday, but they're sitting back watching all these other teams in the division and the conference lose. The Chiefs lose, the Dolphins lose, the Jets lose, and now after all this panic, suddenly the Bills are the top seed again, like they should be. I think the Bills, they're home. I think they're going to win this game. 10 points against the Jets defense is a little rich for me. I think this is going to be a touchdown game. So with that said, I'm going to take the Jets to keep it closer than 10 points. But I do like the Bills to win.
Yeah, I mean, both you guys make some points, very good points, and things I've thought about too. But I think the Bills want revenge from the last time they played the Jets. I think they might have, underestimated them, and they're not going to do that. I think Highmark Stadium, wherever they're calling it nowadays, is going to be pretty packed and pretty fervent Bills fans showing their support. I think that's going to help. And Mike White, I mean, look, this guy has played is played adequate, okay, but he hasn't set the world on fire by any means. So I think the Bills, they know they got to start putting things into gear now. We're in December. So I think they cover the -10. I like them to cover the spread and beat the crap out of the Jets. All right, our next game, speaking of New York teams that play in Jersey, the Giants are 7-point home underdogs to the Eagles. The Giants, they were kind of the feel-good story of the first couple months of the season, but kind of like the clock struck midnight on the Cinderella and they've turned back into a pumpkin. They have not played well recently. They lost the Lions. They've just been a really bad football team. And the Eagles, I think they know that the Cowboys are right on their heels for that division. And they know they can't take any chances. So I like them to go into New York East Rutherford, New Jersey, and cover the 7-point spread against the Giants. Justin, who do you have?
Yeah, I'm with you. I said it since the first month of the season when people were getting excited about the Giants. I was like, hey, hold your horses. I think they're a smoke and mirrors team. They're not very talented, and they're riding Saquon Barkley, who's he had a great start to the season, but he's an injury-prone running back, and I think that consistently running your head against the wall, maybe that can work for a little bit, but at some point they just don't have the talent. And I don't think that's a shock to anyone. They weren't expected to be good this year. They've outperformed their expectations. I'm sure they've crushed whatever their win-loss total was for the year, but they've come crashing back down to earth. They're 1-3-1 in their last 5 games. And the Eagles, I think people were starting a little doubt was seeping in, like, are they as good as their record indicates? They've answered the bell these last few weeks. They've been one of the few teams really that consistently on offense, and they've been healthy too. Let's not forget that important aspect, but they've been one of the few teams in the league that just week after week after week, they seem to be able to put up 28 to 35 points. They have a really good rushing attack, obviously, with Jalen Hurts. So I think the Eagles are going to win this one going away.
All right. Robert?
Yeah, just looking back at the Giants' recent schedule, this is a team that lost to the Lions within the last few weeks. Obviously, that tie against the Commies. The Commies and the Giants are really two similar teams, I think. You have quarterbacks that are, they can win those games against, similar or lesser opponents usually. But they're fairly limited. I mean, you look at both of those offenses and, there's not a whole lot of talent there. Now, on the other side of the ball with the Eagles, they've got a ton of talent on offense. That defense has been, there have been some shaky moments there, but the defense, or the offense rather, has bailed them out, with Jalen Hurts play. They've got Miles Sanders at running back, and AJ Brown has, really found his groove, with Philadelphia after that trade. So, I'm going with the Eagles too here. I just think that they're a better team, and quite frankly, with the Giants, I think the Giants have been slipping, and a lot of that's due to their quarterback. I don't think Daniel Jones is going to be the guy for them going forward. He's not the guy that'll, he's not a Mahomes or Allen type, and he's not going to be able to put the team on his shoulders. He's going to need help to do it. And that's why, to Justin's point, you see Saquon, the Giants defense has played, pretty well for most of the season, but, in a quarterback driven league, you're going to need your quarterback to step up, and Daniel Jones, that just isn't it. So yeah, going with the Eagles in this one.
All right. Our next game is the Battle of the Buckeye State. The Cleveland Browns at the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals are 5.5-point home favorites. The Browns, long time ago, I don't know what week it was it week 2? It was early on, but I guess they really did a number on the Bengals. And of course, the Browns have the Sean Watson back. And to be honest with you, he didn't play he played like a guy he hadn't played in 2 years. He played like crap last week against the Texans. He's lucky that his teammates lifted him up with I guess there was a special teams, a punt return touchdown. There was a
couple defensive touchdowns. Yeah.
Defensive touchdown. I mean, it was the Browns easily won that game, but it wasn't because of Deshaun Watson. Bengals, meanwhile, I mean, look, they've got Kansas City's number, and you could say that the Bengals are starting to peak now. They're getting healthy. I know that they're getting some of their talented skill players back. So, I like them to cover the 5.5 against the Browns. I think the Browns know that they're not going anywhere this season, and the Bengals know that they've got to keep winning too with Baltimore, with Lamar. Lamar, whatchamacallit there, hurt.
Jackson.
So I'm sorry, Lamar Jackson. I'm drawing a blank there. Hey, you know something? It's not like I write this stuff down in advance. I just wing it. So
Yeah, no kidding.
I flub a name. So I like the Bengals to cover the 5.5. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, you mentioned that game. I think it was back in October when the Browns, won by a big margin. But boy, has a lot changed since then. The Bengals have been playing pretty good football. They beat the Chiefs. That was a pretty nice feather in their cap. They beat the Titans. Those were two of the better teams in the AFC, and they beat both of those teams. So I think the Bengals have been playing pretty good football lately. Joe Burrow's been looking pretty good, and that's despite some injuries that they've been dealing with. They just got Jamar Chase back, and Joe Mixon has been out. So it says a lot for Burrow's development. That he's been able to shoulder the load. But credit to the backup running back there. I'm forgetting his name too. So Chris, you gave me a case of the forgetfulness here. Yes, that Perrine. Yeah. So he's been pretty solid for them. He's usually a receiving back, but he's run the ball pretty well. Ran the ball pretty well against the Chiefs. So I'm going with the Bengals. I think the Browns. It helps them that Deshaun Watson comes back now. He can kind of get used to the Brown system or whatever, but I don't think you can expect too much out of this team based on what we saw against the Texans of all teams last week, that that offense can play well. And by the way, just check that apparently Amari Cooper didn't practice today, so that's a receiving weapon that he'll be without possibly come Sunday. So yeah, going with the Bengals. All
right, Justin.
Well, I guess I'm going to be the one who zags to your guys' zig. I was surprised to see that Joe Burrow has never beaten the Browns, 0-4 in his career against the Browns. So I don't think that's nothing. Sometimes, Chris mentions, the Bengals, they own the Chiefs. Well, they ain't playing the Chiefs this week. They're playing the Browns. So, I'm going to go in the other direction here. I think the Bengals are going to win this game. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I think it's going to be like a 3-point game. So my math tells me that means I have to pick the Browns to take this. I don't feel good about it. Deshaun Watson is a scumbag. I'm glad that he looked terrible in his return to football and his return against the Texans. But all that said, I think the Browns are a little frisky. I'm not saying they're going to go on some run here to make the playoffs or anything, but they have talented players, and I think they've given the Bengals trouble over the last few years. So I'm going to ride with that.
All right. Our last game is my Miami Dolphins. They're 3.5-point road favorites at the Chargers. Robert, well, I'm going to have Justin go first. Justin, who do you like in this game?
What is this? The 2020 draft?
Yes.
Battle here. This is, obviously I picked the 49ers last week against the Dolphins. I think that the 49ers had the best defense, and I just, setting all the statistics aside, I'm sorry, Chris, I am still not a Tua believer. I think he's a competent NFL starter, but I just thought it was hilarious last week when the entire game, the announcing crew was talking about all these metrics with Tua's accuracy and completion percentage and most accurate quarterback in football. And it's like every time they'd say that, in the next play, he'd overthrow, Tyreek Hill, like throw it 3 feet over his head, or he did that to Jeff Wilson once, like where he just could have put the ball on the money down the sideline and overthrew him. I don't think the Chargers have nearly the same quality of defense as the 49ers do, but I don't know. I'm just not quite as sold on the Dolphins. I think definitely they've given fans like yourself a reason to be excited about the way they play. They're, as I've said a few times this year, they're a more entertaining team than I think they've had in the recent years. But I don't know. This is a tough line for me. And that extra half point, it just scares me away. So I'm not going to factor in LA's home field advantage because it doesn't exist. But I don't know. I'm going to ride with the better quarterback, I guess. I'm going to go with the Chargers here.
Oh boy. All righty. All right. I get it. There will be a lot of aqua in LA. Trust me. All right, Robert. Very, very eager to hear your selection. Who are you picking?
Well, I just looking at the Dolphins this season, yes, they have feasted against inferior opposition. But when you look at the games what's that?
Like the Bills.
Oh, the Dolphins offense did pretty well against the Bills, did they?
They won the game, didn't they, though? All right. You opened yourself up for that one. Go ahead.
What I'll say is that the Dolphins against teams like the Bills, against the Patriots earlier in the season, against the 49ers last week, I think we saw, McDaniel has to come up with answers for when his team faces, stiffer competition on defense. It doesn't seem like he has that. The 49ers game, I think they were exposed a bit because, he panicked, went away from the run. They only ran the ball 8 times in that game, and it was a close game for most of the way. And it seems like he panicked and said, "Oh, we're going to put it all on Tua." Well, he should heed the warning signs with what happened with Russell Wilson in Seattle when they decided that Russell Wilson was going to be the guy. And yeah, he had some good games over the years, no question about it. They did go to the playoffs and everything, but when you don't have a competent running game with a quarterback like that, it's going to hurt you. And I think that with the Dolphins, you have these two guys that clearly know McDaniel's system, Mostert and Wilson, and you don't use them. And that to me was perplexing. I think that you're going to see them a lot more this week, I would assume anyway, because you've got to bring that element back into your team, because if teams know that they're passing, it seems like that's where the Dolphins' shortcomings come into play, especially with that offensive line, Chris. They've had some injuries. I know that you've talked about this before. It's not the best unit out there. The key for Tua's success has been quick passing game, short, intermediate. I've said that before, but I think that's got to be his bread and butter. Look, the Chargers, they've been kind of up and down this season. I do think that they're getting healthier. Keenan Allen was out for a long time. They get him back. Obviously, they have Eckler in the backfield. So I think that that's helpful. But I do think the Dolphins can win this game by 4. But I think that, McDaniel has to go back to what works for that team. And it isn't having Tua shoulder the load. You need to mix in the run. You have these guys for a reason. So use them.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And yeah, 8 carries was inexcusable. Look, few things. Tua had a horrible game last week. He was, like you guys said, he was missing open receivers. When I say overthrew, he's trying to throw high balls to Waddle and Hill, and he threw too high, and he missed some open receivers. It was a little disconcerting, to be honest with you. But yeah, 8 times running the ball, not enough in a close game. And I think the Dolphins could have made a more concerted effort to run the football. Teron Armstead still unknown whether he's going to play on Sunday night or not. Liam Eichenberg, high draft pick offensive lineman, has been activated off injured reserve. I don't know how effective he's going to be anyways, because he wasn't that good when he was active. So the Dolphins' offensive line is really the Achilles heel on their offense there. If the offensive line can play well, then I like the Dolphins' chances to put up some points because the Chargers defense is not that good. You saw what the Raiders did to the Chargers last week, and we saw what the Raiders did last night, and that's kind of funny. And as for the Dolphins defense, I mean, look, they did not play well last week. They let a third string quarterback get in there with no prep time, and he played a capable game. I'm not saying he was the second coming of Joe Montana or Steve Young or even Alex Smith, okay, but he was credible and he did enough to keep the chains moving, put some points on the scoreboard, and let his defense win the game for him. So the Dolphins defense has to improve, has to get pressure, and God knows that that Herbert's been getting pressured a lot lately. So if the Dolphins defensive pressure can get to Herbert and the offense can protect Tua, or at least open up some holes in the running game. Yes, I am picking my Miami Dolphins, Robert, to cover the 3.5. They got to win this game. Look, to me, this is the most important game of the season in regard to the playoffs. And I know Robert's thinking like, well, what about the Bills game coming up? They play the Patriots, they play the Jets, and they play the Packers on Christmas Day. The Dolphins, if the Dolphins can get to 10 wins, they have about a 90% chance of getting to the playoffs. Okay. 11 wins, it's 100%, according to the New York Times playoff simulator thing that you guys have seen that thing before. So this is a must win for the Dolphins because look, it's going to be tough to win in Buffalo next week. New England is going to be tough on the road. Green Bay, I mean, who knows what Green Bay team we're going to get, which it could be a win, should be a win, but you don't know. And then they host the Jets in the last game of the season, and the Jets might really need that game desperately to get in the playoffs. So, in the division opponent, you never know what's going to happen. So for me, as a Dolphins fan, this is a game that you are favored to win. You are the better team. You have the better coach. I like to think that one. And I'd like to think that with all these factors involved, the Dolphins are going to find a way to win this game. And yes, I will pick them to cover the 3.5. I'm going with them to cover. So yeah, I'm picking my Miami Dolphins to cover. So, all righty. And so Robert, yeah, you did pick the Dolphins to win and cover. How about that? Well, I give it to you. All righty.
I've been picking your team more than you've picked your team this year.
Yeah, well, you're doing the reverse jinx thing. Figuring if you pick them, then they're going to do bad. So No, of course not. All right.
Who's leading these standings? So if you picked your team more, maybe you'd be up in first with me.
Okay. I'm only a game behind you, by the way.
A game, 2 games, doesn't matter.
Well, hey, I'm still first is first by 1 game. That is true. All righty. So our takeaways from week 13. I just think that we continue to see that there's a separation here. Teams that are no longer, or they're on the periphery of the playoff race are starting to fall aside, and teams that are on the right side of things are starting to step up and play better. And like I alluded to earlier, last night's Raiders-Rams game, I mean, that's one we're going to be talking about for years. I mean, that may be the game that, like, when you look back at the career of Baker Mayfield, that may be the one game that comes to your mind first, that this guy basically, with less than 2 full days of preparation, was able to lead his team on a 98-yard scoring drive under 2 minutes to beat the Raiders. I mean, it's just astounding. And, I listened to some sports talk radio this morning, and the Raider fans are they're stunned. They're beat down. There wasn't anger. It was complete desolation, depression, that they knew this was coming. They'd seen this movie before, because as we all know, the Raiders have blown 4 double-digit leads this season. That's the first time that's happened in the NFL, I believe, since 1930? And don't say, Robert, oh, you were around for that, Chris. You remember that season? I wasn't. Anyways, that game was just astounding how it ended. And it just shows you that in the NFL, you can't take anything for granted. You can't assume anything, and that literally anything can happen. You cannot really rule anything out of the realm of possibility. So that's my takeaway. It's just the craziness continues. You got to love it unless you're a Raiders fan. And for Rams fans like my buddy Dave Coleman, well, I'm happy for him, because it's been a tough season for him after winning the Super Bowl. And I'm glad hopefully he got to see that one, and that was a good victory for him. All right, Robert, your takeaways from week 13.
Well, just quickly on that game last night, the Raiders, I don't know what you do about that. I mean, obviously, a lot of heat on McDaniels for, how that team has performed, especially with big leads. I mean, you look at their record and you look at those 4 games they've lost, and you flip that around, and I mean, we're talking a much better team, obviously, than what they are. And I think that's it's certainly partially a reflection of the players and their performance. I don't think anybody who watched that game last night will come away with, oh, Derek Carr had a good game, that offense looked good, whatever. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the coaching, and I don't know what sets in, when they have these big leads, whether they go conservative or what the deal is, but they seem to blow it. And I I was reading something today about how they had 2 4th-and-1s last night, and they chose to punt both times. And you've got one of the best running backs in football. You have one of the best receivers in the game, in Devontae Adams, who he'll get you a few yards if you throw him the ball. He'll get open. You have 2 options there that you could go to, and they choose to punt. Um, so I think that's bad. My main takeaway from last week's action is how the Bengals have been really surging. Are they surging too early? I guess we'll find out. But they played pretty well against the Chiefs. On Sunday. They have that win against the Titans. The week before. Those are 2 good wins. As I talked about before. Against AFC contenders. And, they do have a game coming up near the end of the season against the Bills. That'll be a fun one. I think it's on Monday Night Football. I think it's the last Monday Night Football game of the year. So, we'll see how that goes. But, they seem to be, clicking. That defense has been solid. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the Bengals have a top 5 defense. No, but they certainly play well enough in situations that it helps the Bengals win. And then, you've got on the offensive side of the ball, Burrow's been playing well. So, I think the Bengals have looked pretty good so far. I think that, they're making a case like, hey, everybody's talking about the Chiefs, the Bills, they should be talking about the Bengals too. And I think with the way that AFC North is kind of playing out there, especially with the injury to Lamar Jackson, that, they should be able to finish off that division and get a home playoff game, and we'll see what happens from there.
Justin, your thoughts?
Well, my takeaway is that these final 5 weeks is going to be really interesting to see who pulls away in the MVP race. That's not something we've talked about a whole lot this year. I think, and that's not just this, the Sports Weekly with us, but I think the national conversation, it's like the last couple of years, the MVP chatter has been almost like Heisman-esque, where it's like we're 2 weeks into the season and there's already who's the MVP debate. And it's kind of funny because it's a really compelling conversation, like in a good way, for who should be the favorite right now. I mean, I know a lot of the odds makers have Mahomes as the favorite right now, and certainly if you just look at his touchdown total and passing yardage, and the Chiefs are 9-3, obviously he is a worthy candidate. But I'll tell you what, I think the guys in the conversation right now have to be obviously Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, and Robert's guy Josh Allen, who was the favorite coming into the season, and I think had 3 kind of weird weeks, and he's dealing with this elbow injury, and they have that weird Vikings loss, and suddenly he's like not really part of the conversation, but he should be. I mean, statistically, you factor in his rushing attack, and oh, hey, by the way, the Bills are the number 1 seed right now. He deserves to be in the conversation, as does Joe Burrow, who I think you could look at over the last month has been the best quarterback in football, or at least one or two. And then Jalen Hurts, I think statistically, he's had the cleanest year. He doesn't turn the ball over. Obviously, he adds the rushing element. And the Eagles are having a fantastic season. I think just based on pure, like, who would I want leading my team, I think he's number 4 in that conversation. I think he's a little more limited than the other 3 guys. But, I don't like how Mahomes is just assumed to be the MVP right now. I think you look at a lot of his performances. He's racked up great stats against NFC teams in games that, don't really matter. Like he lit up the Cardinals back in week 1. He lit up the 49ers, which that's an impressive performance. You can't take that away from him. But and then he lit up the Buccaneers. Well, those are NFC teams. How do you do against the AFC teams that are the games that are going to decide where they finish in the standings? Look at how he did against the other division leaders. Last week, didn't really play that well against the Bengals. When they played the Bills, threw a couple interceptions. Didn't play that great against the Bills on his home field. And then the Titans, they won in overtime. He threw like 70 times. That was a good performance that maybe the statistics didn't do him justice. But I think there's a hard argument against him that how can you be the most valuable player when you didn't play well and you were outplayed by 2 of the other strong candidates, and that's Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. So, it's going to be fascinating to kind of watch how this plays out over the last month of the season. And I think maybe this isn't fair to Mahomes, but they play in primetime against Denver this week, and then they're all 1:00 the rest of the way. The other guys, they're going to be, the Bills have a couple primetime games left against Miami, against the Bengals. All these other teams are going to be playing with the entire world watching these games. And that's going to be an opportunity for those guys to really stand out. And then here's going to be the Chiefs kind of playing, a bunch of lame teams. Like they have the Raiders left. They have the Texans left. I mentioned the Broncos. I really wonder if one of these other guys is going to kind of seize the moment, and whether it's Allen or Burrow or Jalen Hurts, and steal I shouldn't say steal. I think it'd be a worthy pick, but kind of grab hold of the MVP while Mahomes is kind of floundering a little bit. So I'm excited to watch how this plays out.
All right. Okay, gentlemen, I guess we'll wrap it up then. Some good observations as always, folks. We appreciate you joining us. Enjoy the games, and we'll see you next week.